Unfortunately, if Bitcoin does not develop, does not adopt a quantum computing resistant signature algorithm, that'll also the fiat reality becomes the Bitcoin future, because we will, instead of being secured by cryptography, we're having to secure ourselves through surveillance by trying to know who has what accounts through chain analysis, and then you'll try to find them using a private detective or just going through the state police, and that's how you'll have to retrieve funds that have ever been taken from you.
Welcome to the Bitcoin Source, your essential podcast for all things Bitcoin. I'm your host, Daru, and today we have a truly awesome session lined up for you. Our guest is none other than Hunter Beast, a developer, visionary, and Bitcoin maximalist who is pioneering new approaches to strengthen Bitcoin's resilience in an ever-changing technological landscape. For my technical listeners out there, this one is for you. We really get into the potential threats posed by quantum computing to Bitcoin's cryptographic systems and how the Bitcoin community must evolve to meet these challenges head on. So without further ado, let's get into this episode.
Hi, Dadu. Good to see you. It's the first time we've been talking, but that said, I'm looking forward to this interview.
Yes, most definitely. So, Hunter, let's just get right into it. I've been kind of paying attention to a lot of the things that you've been doing in the space, and there was a quote that you famously put out into the ethos where you stated that I didn't start off as a Bitcoin maxi. I just eventually realized that the maxis were right. And I think that that resonates with a lot of people. Can you explain how you came to that realization and what was there? Was there any specific moment or event that kind of led you to, have that aha moment?
So I would say the biggest thing that opened my eyes to sort of like just focusing on Bitcoin is there's kind of this misconception about Bitcoin that there's not a lot of development happening in the space, and that it's like a boomer coin that is first generation blockchain. It doesn't have smart contracts, and all that is basically not quite true. And the reason why is because a lot of the development happens in layers. So a lot of people are talking about L2s these days, but even before that, there's Lightning and RGB, and both of those projects really kind of like opened my eyes regarding to where Bitcoin could go. And although there's still a lot of work to be done, there is just a lot of energy and promise in like payment channels like Lightning, especially like Bolt 12 and multi-sig channels, or MUSIG 2, I should say, Taproot channels, and PTLCs also could be a big thing for Lightning. And all those innovations together could make Lightning just as private as Monero. In fact, more private because there's no on-chain record. And you get the sender privacy with Bolt 12, you get on-chain privacy with Taproot, and then you get like man-in-the-middle type privacy from TTLCs. And that addresses a lot of the concerns that people have had around Lightning. Similarly, with RGB, there's RGB is essentially a smart contract protocol that's built on top of Bitcoin UTXOs. And so for those who don't know what a UTXO is, it's basically just like a little pile of money that once you spend it, it can't be spent again. So that's how Bitcoin prevents double spend, and it creates a new pile of money in its place, or several. And what you can do with an RGB smart contract is you anchor that with anchor to a UTXO using what's called a cryptographic commitment, and you can anchor the parts of the contract that change, that are dynamic, to UTXOs, and while still keeping certain parameters like the name of the smart contract and say the supply of say a token contract. Those things will stay static as like kind of global variables that everybody will have. And then the contract state sort of shards out across all the different people using it. And so what's nice about RGB and Lightning is they both scale really well, because they have this capability for, Lightning has routing and through graph, and graphs scale pretty well, and then also maybe not computationally, but certainly topologically, and then RGB, of course, with the sharding, the state sharding, without being like a single global state, is a huge competitive advantage when you want to scale to serve billions. And so that's one reason I'm really bullish about Bitcoin, is because we have worked really hard on these off-chain protocols to scale Bitcoin, because it's so much more limited on chain. And that limitation is actually quite advantageous for layer developers, because it offers a stable foundation to build upon. So if that makes sense, does that make like that like layered development really like makes me bullish on Bitcoin, and Bitcoin in particular, versus pretty much any other chain? Although, like Ethereum might have these ZK rollups, and it does have contracts built into the protocol, it's not Bitcoin. Bitcoin is like, this huge untapped market where it's underserved by DeFi, especially Bitcoin native DeFi. And that's something I'm working on at Ducat Protocol. I don't know if you've looked into that any. But I'm really bullish on, like our capability to scale Bitcoin's functionality, and how many people are able to use it, and also the fees required in order to do so.
Yeah, for sure, Hunter. There's a lot to unpack there, and I try not to nerd out on this stuff. But when you mentioned like ZK rollups, I had a very in-depth conversation with another developer by the name of John Light, and me and him kind of
Yeah,
had
I'm
like,
familiar with this work.
yeah, so we were talking about like back bridges, and I wasn't really a huge fan of it because I always felt like bridges were just a huge way to be exploited or to get hacked. And he kind of just really got into the weeds of like why he thinks that this layer two or on off chain solution was good for Bitcoin. And then I stumble upon you. And for me personally, I've always thought that the Lightning Network was something that was really like the splitting of the Red Sea for Bitcoin. And I feel like a lot of people are starting to like hate on Lightning. Like Lightning, I love, and I love to see developers continuing to fortify Lightning. Like you have people kind of skipping steps now when they're talking about Liquid, and they're trying to like kind of deviate away from Lightning. And I know that you've been working on a Bitcoin improvement protocol, or a BIP, for quantum resistant addresses, which you call, correct me if I'm wrong, P2QRH. Could you break down for our listeners what that is and why that's important for Bitcoin's future?
Yeah, so Bitcoin has several different how would you say, address types, and they've evolved throughout the years through soft forks. One of the earlier transitions was SegWit, when we came out with a completely different looking address. Early addresses started with a 1, and they were quite short. SegWit addresses used a slightly less efficient encoding, so they're a little bit longer, and they also have error correction built in, error correction codes, and so that makes them a little bit longer. And uh, they commit to what they call a SegWit v0 uh, witness program that pushes 20. I'm getting way into the weeds on that one, but yes, there are different address types. And so Taproot also introduced a new address type in addition to novel cryptography called Schnorr signatures.
Okay.
And we actually had to introduce like non-backwards compatible cryptography in the signature specification in particular, going from ECDSA, which was essentially replaced by Schnorr signatures. And Schnorr signatures are shorter; they're superior in just about every way. They have more functionality, like signature aggregation, and it's or actually like certainly public key aggregation. And so they have a lot of promise for all the sort of different things that Bitcoin uses them for, especially in the context of Taproot. Now, P2 quantum resistant hash, what that does is, or P2QRH, is a new address type that combines the benefits of Taproot and does not replace classical cryptography, but what it does is it augments it with an additional signature type or signature algorithm, and in fact, it's several different signature algorithms that are being defined in the BIP. But we're starting out with just one, at least for development purposes, and we'll be adding more over time. And the thing to know about post-quantum cryptography is that the signature sizes and public key sizes are about somewhere between 10 and 100 times bigger than Schnorr signatures and SEC P256K1 public keys, which are the kind of keys that the public-private key cryptography that Bitcoin uses to secure addresses. And so the concern around quantum computers is that a quantum computer could potentially one of the more trivial things to do with one is to factor numbers, and so and the way that elliptic curve cryptography is secured is with a problem called the discrete log problem, and that essentially is it describes the fact that it's very difficult to factor large numbers, and so especially like large prime numbers, and so the concern around post-quantum cryptography is that the reason people bring it up is because it's a significantly harder problem for quantum computers to solve. It's not impossible, but it is significantly harder, and you would need like a much bigger expensive computer than maybe even the planet could handle. And so like we're talking about like astronomical size computers, and so quantum resistance isn't like the perfect solution, but it gets us to the point where we have a safe place to put our Bitcoin in case of a quantum emergency. And that's something that we have to get ahead of if we don't want to hard fork the coin. We need to just do a soft fork, introduce the new address format, and people will start using that. And the people update their wallets, exchanges, everybody will have to update. It'll take multiple years, and over time, people will be transitioning to the new address format. And the way we solved for the signature size and public key size problem is the same way that SegWit sort of scaled its signatures, in that they put the signatures in a separate portion of the transaction called the witness. With paid to quantum resistant hash, we actually solve for that in a slightly different way. We use a completely separate field called the attestation, and so we keep the witness discount where it is, but we provide an additional 4x discount to the attestation, which is a total of 16x discount, which is enough to make post-quantum cryptography at least like as it currently exists today, is somewhat reasonable proposition for maintaining roughly, maybe not exactly the same amount of throughput depending on the signature algorithm, but something close to it. And so that's and of course the thing that also to know about the attestation is that it only validates post-quantum cryptography signatures can be included in the attestation. We do allow for one classical signature, but that can be abused. And so we're trying to like cut down on the level of shenanigans that people can do with something so serious as the attestation, which is what we need to make post-quantum cryptography on Bitcoin a reality.
Hunter, that's a huge undertaking, bro. Like that's, I think that that's something that is definitely needed, and it's like you're kind of one of the unsung heroes of this bit protocol. Hopefully it reaches consensus and people actually see the importance. But I definitely wanted to dig into something you mentioned when you talked about a soft fork. And I know that the soft fork that you have for this protocol is called Qubit. What challenges did you face while developing this, and how did you envision it being adopted by the Bitcoin community?
Yeah, so Qubit is, I'm glad you brought that up. So essentially that is what would introduce the 16x discount for quantum cryptography. That's of course like, a it'll complicate the lives of node runners eventually as quantum signatures get more adopted. I don't see all signatures being adopted not until way later, just because quantum computers are very expensive to run, and so people aren't going to be trying to steal your $100, $1,000 keys. They're gonna go after the exchange keys that often reuse their addresses and that sort of thing. And that's also just one thing to be clear on, is that not all Bitcoin addresses are currently vulnerable. It's Taproot addresses are vulnerable, and addresses that have been spent from before and have received funds again, basically what we call address reuse, those are also vulnerable. And anything you submit to the mempool is vulnerable, and very old keys that would have been used by Satoshi and other people, maybe in 2009, 2010, by CPU miners, those are also vulnerable. But those block rewards are like 50 Bitcoin. And so people will be going after those instead of the plebs. And that's why I also introduced something called Satoshi Shield. It's just a way to conceptualize Satoshi's coins, and that's why I don't recommend us disabling the capability to spend those coins, because first of all, there's no way to know if there's a theft versus a legitimate person trying to secure their own coins. But also, if there are quantum attackers that are going after Bitcoin, ideally they go after lost coins, and those those 50 Bitcoin paid to public key, actual public keys on chain early on. Those kind of serve as a protection mechanism, actually. At least if the attacker is financially motivated. There is, of course, a case to be made that there might be a nation-state actor that might try to attack Bitcoin with a quantum computer, and that's definitely also a concern. United States government actually has a roadmap for post-quantum cryptography, and it stretches out to 2029 and 2033 in terms of where they expect the transition to finalize. And so they're already transitioning right now. Actually, they have standards that they've approved, and these federal information processing standards that are defined for specific digital signature algorithms that have been vetted by the National Institute of Science and Technology. These algorithms are what we're hoping will be what we need to protect against quantum computers.
Nice. And for those who aren't familiar with quantum computing, Hunter, in your opinion, how soon do you think we'll see quantum computers capable of breaking Bitcoin's current cryptographic systems?
Well, so there's what the academics think is possible. And there's where the industry is headed, and there's of course what might be potentially possible at a bare minimum if you run a quantum computer for long enough. And so there's a number of different variables that go into that question. But if I had to guess, we should really try to be prepared within the 5 to 10 years time frame.
That's kind of scary, but because as a Bitcoiner, people have always talked about the high level layers of security that this protocol has, whether it's encryption or crypto hashing, cryptographic hashing, and from someone coming from a traditional banker or finance realm and hearing these things, it sounds like over high level technical jargon, but to the nerds and to the cypherpunks and to the engineers, it's like it just makes perfect sense that you would have encrypted money that you can essentially make malleable through software code. That just makes more sense for the future. And then a monkey wrench gets thrown in, which is this quantum computer that 25 years ago we had no idea that this thing would exist, or we might have heard it in like science fiction comic novels or something. And here it is coming to fruition. And then it's like, okay, if you're stacking Bitcoin right now, in 10 years, we could assume it'll be a million, maybe 3 million a coin if things go well. It's going to create honeypots where, like you said, they're going to be coming after the honeypot organizations like Coinbase, who was in control of most of the ETF bag for Bitcoin. Like that's something that a hacker would immediately be trying to see if they could crack, right? And you have people like yourself, Hunter, who are these developers in the space that are looking for consensus, kind of waving the red flag to say, hey, this is something as Bitcoiners that we need to pay attention to. And I have the code and I have the protocol on how to go about doing this. Because a lot of people just talk, but they don't have any real solution. So that's why I'm super excited to have this conversation with you today, because a lot of people in my audience that watch the show will definitely gain some huge insight on where we're headed as far as our security with our Bitcoin and quantum computing. Hey, it's Daru from the Bitcoin Source, and if you're a podcaster like me, you know how important it is to have a website that represents your show professionally. That's why I want to introduce you to Podpage, the absolute best website builder made specifically for podcasters. What I love about Podpage is just how easy it is. No headaches, no coding. You just plug in your podcast feed and it builds a stunning professional website just for you, complete with all your episodes and reviews and even contact forms for users to sign up on. Now I have to keep it real. We are all busy in this crazy tech-based heavy world. Other platforms make you do all the heavy lifting, but Podpage updates your website every time you post a new episode. Plus it integrates Apple, Google, and Spotify reviews so your audience can see your latest ratings right on the website. If you're serious about having a podcast, this should be a non-negotiable, and Podpage makes that effortless. So if you're ready to level up your podcast, easy to build, beautifully designed website, I highly recommend Podpage. Give it a try. You won't be disappointed. Now back to the episode.
Right, exactly. I mean, like in many ways, the way the big innovation that Bitcoin brings is, well, currently the fiat system is secured not through really cryptography. It's secured through surveillance and the state's capability and monopoly on violence. And so, and that they can just put you away and take away your rights, just to secure the financial system. Bitcoin, on the other hand, is a protocol of peace, right? Like it really is like it secures itself without the necessity to surveil every user necessarily. I mean, it depends on your perspective, but like in many ways, like everybody's transactions are public, but we don't have the information on the individual that is transacting, at least intrinsic to the chain. And so that's one reason why KYC also is to be avoided, because like that connecting your Bitcoins on chain with an identity is a big problem, and will continue to be a problem into the future as there are hacks and doxing and things like that. The one thing I think is really important is that we minimize how much happens through exchanges, and instead we work on developing DeFi type things and Bitcoin only peer-to-peer transfers, that kind of thing. The thing about the quantum transition and the fiat banking is, if there is a bank that's compromised through quantum insecurity, they can always just rewrite the record. They can repatriate the funds. They can make them go to zero, and in the digital ledger that they use, and it's not a immutable ledger, and so they set the rules, and they'll zero out those funds, and then they'll say, well, their funds are no longer theirs now, or even worse, they might even go after the individual who repatriated those funds, and then use policing, their capability to police individuals, to extort them into returning those funds. And unfortunately, if Bitcoin does not does not adopt a quantum computing resistant signature algorithm, that'll also the fiat reality becomes the Bitcoin future, because we will, like, instead of being secured by cryptography, we're having to secure ourselves through surveillance by trying to know who has what accounts through chain analysis. and then you'll try to find them using a private detective or just going through the state police. And that's how you'll have to retrieve funds that have ever been taken from you. And so that's like the that's really no better than the current system, and it's preventable. That's the thing, is if we get ahead of it, that reality is preventable.
100%, I agree with that, and that's definitely why I wanted to have this conversation with you. And let's talk about your work with Surmount Systems. How did you come up with the idea to create that BIP that I think, in my personal opinion, is probably one of the most important things that we should be discussing in Bitcoin right now? And was that something that you've always planned on working on, or did it evolve from some other project at Surmount?
No, well, see, the thing is, really, the I would say that, like, the problem with that I was trying to solve with the BIP is, well, I just never saw anybody coming uh to do this, like to secure Bitcoin. I kept reading about. I've read several books on quantum computing, and there's a lot of energy and money being put into that space. It's been making incremental improvements for a long time now, and eventually those improvements will be good enough. And this is just me being a low time preference Bitcoiner. I'm like, okay, well, we should be talking about this, and not just talking about this, but addressing this in a serious way. And the way that we address things in a serious way in Bitcoin is through discussion on the mailing list and amongst other Bitcoin developers, and of course, introduction of an actual BIP that people can look at and review and decide if this is the best course of action, and kind of center the discussion around on something that's more tangible. And so, yeah, the BIP just came out of this sense of this isn't being addressed. I was surprised. I actually went to the BIP's repo where we keep all the BIPs that are presented, and I did a search for quantum cryptography, and nothing came up. And I went to the mailing list, and there was this recent transition from semi-recent transition from the old Linux mailing list to the new Google mailing list, and nothing was there either. I was shocked because like there's this threat we talk about on Twitter all the time. It comes up all the time nowadays. Every time there's a new like sort of innovation that comes out of the quantum space, it just gets people's minds turning towards this thing they care a lot about, and so I care a lot about Bitcoin. I consider myself a Bitcoiner through and through, and I consider Bitcoin to be our best chance at liberating ourselves from this cycle that has been plaguing humanity from the very get-go, from ancient civilization. We keep debasing our money, and it destroys the civilization. We've seen this time and time again, as Saylor says, and so it's for us to break this cycle, like, we need not only to adapt Bitcoin for quantum computing, but in many ways, this accelerates the transition to post-quantum cryptography that everybody needs to deal with. Bitcoin will set the example, ideally, of how to secure a digital system, like a cryptographic system, in this new day and age. And so that's something I'm really looking forward to once we actually start writing code for the soft fork. We haven't started yet, just because, and we have like a very small team at Surmount, but it's also quite, like we like to think we're quite capable, and we are accepting donations. We formed a nonprofit, and so anybody's welcome to come and visit surmount.systems and see the donation links. Got to chill there a little bit, but yeah, if you think this is something that's important for us to address through code, right? That helps a lot. And in addition, just code review or reviewing the BIP, like the reason why we haven't started writing code yet is because it's inappropriate to start with the solution before we're fully comfortable with the approach, right? And so that's why I'm coming to the Bitcoin community with this proposal, in proposal form, not just as like something that has a lot of code behind it. Though we are going to be writing test vectors for the BIP. That's something that's been requested. They actually have a BIP range that they have not revealed to me yet, but they have a range of BIP numbers that they are have allocated towards the BIP, and we'll get our BIP number once we have the test vectors and the sort of like the examples of how we're actually going to implement the attestation within transactions. And so that's kind of the next step for the BIP. And so we're really working hard, and we're really excited about where this could go.
Awesome. Hunter, do you think that we'll see more BIPs focused on improving scalability, or do you think that security will remain the top priority going forward because of something that you've kind of pushed out into the ethos? Like, do you think people will actually see that BIP and say, "Oh, maybe that is an idea that I should continue to build on or support"? Or do you think people are just going to kind of continue to say, how do we make Bitcoin scale? How do we make it more improved on the scalability side?
Well, so I remember Pierre Rochard discussing this on Twitter in the context of ossification, and the conclusion I kind of got from what he came to through his like kind of like verbally exploring things on Twitter or X, right, is just thinking aloud. He way I kind of see where he wound up was he was okay with changes to Bitcoin so long as they were to upgrade its security and in exclusion to necessarily adding more functionality and scalability opcodes related opcodes. And so, yeah, I mean, I think there's always going to be a contingent of Bitcoiners who will, be sympathetic with ossification in pretty much all cases, except for when there is a security threat to Bitcoin. And something that updates its security should be a less controversial soft fork proposal than something that could potentially enable MEV or something that will secure other chains or bring other shenanigans to Bitcoin that we don't even know could happen. So that's why I made efforts to make P2QRH and the Qubit soft fork more conservative and more focused on just quantum security. And there is some scalability capabilities built in, like some measures that we're hoping that will scale the protocol, but only for in service of quantum signatures and not, say storing JPEGs or something silly like that, right? Like this is a very serious proposal. We want people to take it seriously and understand how conservative we were in choosing these parameters. And although it might like a 4x additional discount on top of SegWit, which is a total of 16x, might seem like a lot. That really translates to maybe at most many years down the line. I would say maybe a terabyte per year, but maybe not. More like actually I shouldn't be doing math on but but something like that. Something maybe half terabyte to a terabyte per year versus the 100 gigabytes per year of chain growth we see now. So actually, it'd probably be more like 200 to 300 now that I think about it. Maybe not a whole terabyte, which is good because like scaling your storage to that degree as a node runner is going to be like still important. Like individuals running their own nodes is core to the security of Bitcoin because we can't just trust, we need to verify. And also running your own node is one of the best ways, especially over Tor, is one of the best ways to preserve your privacy because any queries you make to the node don't go through someone else's node. And so, there's we made sure to like balance, like the potential for scaling issues, especially as people try to transition through the mempool through like sending their coins to these new address formats, while also making it so that individual node runners aren't like overwhelmed with all these new bytes that are going on chain. And actually, it's not the perfect solution for all parties. We're not doing like 100x discount, we're doing just 16x. Whereas like some post-quantum cryptography is an x to 100x larger than our like Schnorr signatures. And so if you're doing the math there, it's like, well, if we're including the public keys and the signatures in addition to each other, then like we could certainly have transactions become more expensive if they're quantum resistant. But people will want to pay that price premium because they're going to want to secure their funds. And so, the market will decide essentially what is best for however expensive your UTXO is. And of course, there's another trade-off, which is you may be fine with keeping your funds in something that isn't quantum resistant, so long as you pay a higher fee rate for you to get it out of the mempool quicker. Because like one of the problems with the mempool is it exposes your public key whenever you sign and publish a transaction. That that's a consideration for if like a quantum computer can't necessarily immediately find your key. It would have to take necessarily like, I mean, the larger and more powerful the quantum computer, it would be a substantially more difficult thing to take something from the mempool within 10 minutes to an hour versus a number of days or weeks or months. And so whereas like there's like kind of like this mental calculation people do with prices where they're like, well, maybe I'll be fine with the classical cryptography so long as I get into the next block, versus somebody using post quantum cryptography, and they'll be more want to set a lower fee rate. And they're willing to let that transaction sit in the mempool for longer because they know that it's safe to do so.
Nice. That's I don't even know where to begin on that. Like that's something that when I sit back and watch this episode, like I'm really going to digest that because that is vastly important. Like it makes me think about when you talk about new products coming into the space and people just wanting the convenience of securing their funds. Like I think about something like a BitKey, right? Like where you can just purchase Bitcoin and automatically put it into your cold storage, but you're not really aware of where your private keys are being stored, what database it's on, is that a potential honeypot that could be hacked? There's just so many variables there that we as just consumers of Bitcoin and not like the technocrats of Bitcoin could definitely see ourselves into an issue 15 years from now when you forgot about, oh, where was this thing stored, or where did I put this private key, or I went on the mempool to see like what transaction was validated, and then I realized that I doxed myself. So Hunter, this is like one of those episodes that I think is going to fall into the legendary status for the Bitcoin source. So thank you for that.
Well, I'm really appreciative of just being given a platform to be able to, make people aware of all the work that we're doing at Surmount Systems with the BIP, and also just the necessity for taking the quantum threat seriously.
Yes, and of course we're not done. This is definitely an ongoing conversation, but I remember in the beginning of this conversation, I kind of phrased a quote that you said, and you didn't start off as a Bitcoin maximalist. What were your initial reservations and what changed your perspective over time?
Well, the first time I ever purchased Bitcoin, I bought it for $1,000 on Coinbase. I remember scrolling way back and seeing my old transaction, and I held it for all of 2 hours. I bought a whole Bitcoin for $1,000, and I held it just for 2 hours because it was too volatile, and it just wasn't something like I understood its value of. And now it's worth 64 times 60 something. I haven't even checked the price today, but something high. It's high. It's like, and I would have had to hodl just for I shouldn't be doing math on air, but 7 years, right? And so that's like an example of
60x or something?
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's an example of like, like how I just didn't understand what I had. I didn't understand what the thing it was doing was accomplishing. And also, in many ways, price signals matter. People take something more seriously the more valuable it gets. And so, in many ways, there's going to be people who will be onboarded at the 100,000 price mark, and they'll think some people will think that's expensive. Other people will come to learn more about it because it's worth more. And then eventually, there's going to be a point where Bitcoin will plummet to $100,000. It'll reach some ridiculous all-time high, and then people will see, oh no, it crashes to $100,000, and then people will think, oh, that's so cheap, and like right now we think it's an a very high figure for Bitcoin right now. We're low time preference, like we think further out, and we know where Bitcoin could go. We know that based on its characteristics, that this is the sound money the world needs to break ourselves out of the cycle. And I'm a strong believer in hyper Bitcoinization. I think that's going to be, so, I mean, of course, hyper Bitcoinization is a spectrum. It is a continuum in that there is an adoption curve, right? And of course, Bitcoin's price won't follow the adoption curve because it is a fixed amount of coins, and it'll, like if you ever seen Stock to FOMO, the more people adopt it, much higher the price gets. And it's not linear. It's more like hyperbolic, which that's kind of the future we're envisioning. Whether that takes 5, 10, 15, 25 years, that's like, as low time preference Bitcoiners, we know like this is where this could go. This is generational wealth, and we're just we're doing our best to prepare the people for the future. And not everybody's going to get Bitcoin. Like even after it's worth $1 million, there's going to be a lot of people out there blaming Bitcoin for the collapse of the financial system, right? And you just don't get it. It's kind of on us as Bitcoiners to, because we have this information asymmetry, to look out for those around us and those in the future, and just we're kind of, some might call us doomsday preppers, but like we know that there is an inevitable doomsday on the dollar, in that that there's the death spiral, and unfunded liabilities that will eventually come to roost. And maybe there are ways for us to export inflation around the world, and that sort of thing, but like we've been doing enough of that already. And there's that dollar milkshake theory, but then once there's the dollar milkshake, we're going to drink that too. And so it's it's important that we keep all this secure, and we do this the right way, and we keep things in perspective. A lot of people get really bogged down in little details, like how are we going to scale this to meet like 1 billion people's needs? And that's I wouldn't say a little detail, that's a big detail. But that said, like we can't let the perfect be the enemy of the good. We need this sound money to base everything on. And there's going to be a number of people who will be perfectly satisfied with the existing trust model of banks issuing and holding their money. And what's nice about eCash is it's huge improvement over that, right? Because it's a bearer instrument. You get financial privacy from that, and you also can do proof of reserves and proof of liabilities, which are also a thing that current banks cannot really do or don't need to do. They're just kind of secured by the Fed, because the Fed has an infinite amount of money. So yeah, it's going to take a number of different solutions for us to scale Bitcoin, to secure Bitcoin, to make sure that it's there for us in the future. But that's why it takes so many people to work. A lot of people think Bitcoin is this thing that just like runs itself just because they can use it in a wallet. But there are people who develop that wallet, who update it, who keep it updated with the latest SecP 256K1 elliptic curve libraries, right? Like that gets updated with more work being put towards that. And so and there's the nodes, the Bitcoin core nodes themselves. There's the core devs that work very hard to make sure that Bitcoin is robust piece of software. And and the protocol is secure and stable. And there's the node runners, there's the exchanges, there's the miners. The mining in particular is like proof that Bitcoin wouldn't exist if people weren't actively working to maintain it.
Yeah.
So there's like just this huge ecosystem of people who are involved, and of course the people talking about it, the people making their own decisions about it, the people who don't trust but verify, Bitcoiners. They also come into the equation as stakeholders in this ecosystem, and so that's where your podcast comes in, right? Like that's where your viewers come in, because ultimately it's up to everybody to make up their own mind based upon the merits of the discussion at hand. And so, like you're going to find people who will dismiss the quantum threat because they might not have put up much research into it. And so, people can maybe, hopefully tell, the people who, their arguments don't have as much merit as ideally the one I'm making. And, hopefully there'll be people who are even more qualified than me will step in and be able to explain to people, yes, like this is a very serious thing to be concerned about. Antoine Riard is one of those people I'm really grateful to for who's done a great deal of feedback and review of my BIP. And there's also a guy named professor named Pierre Luc. I'd like to thank him for for giving his feedback as well. So just this has been a big effort. There's a guy named Tippy who's he put together a version of Shor's algorithm that we're able to use to sort of benchmark where quantum computers are currently at, and in terms of like how they could become a threat. And the right now, I would say quantum computers, if run long enough, maybe about a year, they could factor a 64-bit number within some probability, some measure of probability. Maybe it could be within a week to a year, a month. It's somewhere around there. It's like that nebulous how long it would take to factor a 64-bit number. We can't really do 128-bit numbers yet because the qubits just aren't there commercially, though they might be available to nation state actors. I know that Northrop Grumman, for example, has a quantum computing program. There's investments from InQtel, the CIA private arm of the CIA that invests in they invest in quantum computing technologies. And so you never know what the spooks have up their sleeves. So that's just like one reason why we can't, like, our benchmark can't necessarily be like just what's commercially available. We actually have to be creative and think further out, and think about the blind spots. And so we put a lot of thought and research into like how this could evolve. And hopefully people recognize that as they listen to your podcast and read the BIP, because I mean, we've thought about the problem a lot, and we do think it is a legitimate problem.
Hunter, you've been vocal about Bitcoin's role in transforming the global financial system. With central banks discussing CBDCs and more countries looking into digital currencies, where do you see Bitcoin fitting into this global financial landscape?
Well, it's going to be sort of like this shadow economy, like this like secondary system that sits behind fiat until fiat dies, at which point it becomes the system, right? The system that everybody uses. That's where I see it going. I think that's a conviction that is shared by millions of Bitcoiners out there. And in many ways, the price of Bitcoin, the value of Bitcoin, is the sum total of the sheer force of will of millions of people with that conviction, with the conviction that Bitcoin will replace the fiat currency system that we use today. And so I'm not too worried about CBDCs. I'm not too worried about individual nation states. They can try to ban, they can try to tax, they can try to do this or that, surveil and, criminalize, but there's no stopping this train. And the reason why is because there's no stopping the fiat train. As Lynn Alden likes to put out there, she's like, when she sees the Fed doing all these shenanigans, she sees, these other central banks, devaluing their currencies, nothing stops this train. And so that's a thing that just like it gives people a sense of inevitability around Bitcoin. And although, it's fun to get caught up in the price and, talk about, the very latest things in Bitcoin, it's important to remember that like this is a generational project. We're doing this for the benefit of those who will come after us. They say, like there's value in planting a tree knowing that it'll come around 20 years and maybe even after you die, right? But there's still value in doing that now. And so that's planning for the future, the low time preference. That's, I think, the thing that Bitcoin gives us, and it affords us this opportunity to invest in a much better future for all of humanity. I mean, if you think even further out, there could be off-worlding of heavy industry to the moon, and we'll do mining on the moon. And it'll make sense to mine on the moon because we'll have the capability to robotically cover the moon in solar panels. And if that can be automated, then, energy will be very cheap. And wherever energy is cheap and abundant, Bitcoin miners will go. And also, what's nice about the moon is it's very cold there, and so you can actually take the heat from the miners and inject it into the lunar regolith deep down. I call it selenothermal heat rejection. Like that could be where things go. And then with as the miners help roll out energy adoption. What's so cool about Bitcoin mining is that Bitcoin miners essentially they incentivize humanity to produce more energy than is needed, and that's something that necessarily isn't there, other than just the incentive is to avoid disasters or to have energy when it's needed at the peak periods of demand. But the problem with that is there's the subsidization of that capacity, right? Either we're using peaker plants, which are very expensive and polluting, and all seem to belong to Warren Buffett for some reason. If you ever look into who owns the peaker plants in Texas and who might be incentivized to reduce Texas's capability for renewable energy and Bitcoin mining, as like Bitcoin mining is just so cool because it balances out that equation. It gives us this monetary incentive to just be more prepared, and like incentives are everything. And so eventually when we go out to the moon and we start off-worlding heavy industry, just like we did with China, right? It doesn't necessarily make sense logically if you think about it to produce goods so far away and then ship them here unless you do the math on the cost. And if we can further automate things in very inexpensive lunar factories, because the lunar factories don't need to be resistant to weather, they don't need to have many people in them because they're so far away. Everything will be automated, and this sort of fully automated lunar economy, they'll use mass drivers to shoot goods back to Earth, and then they'll be caught by these big cargo freighters that just are inflatable, and they come and use aero braking, and they just break into the ocean, and that's kind of where I think things could go before we start building the Dyson sphere around our sun. And so what's neat about being a Bitcoiner is that you get to just think. You give yourself permission to think this far ahead, because a lot of people they don't give themselves permission to think this far in the future, to become futurists and optimistic about where humanity's going, because people are so pessimistic, people are so black-pilled. And the thing about the orange pill is it gives you that solution. I would be so black-pilled if I didn't know about Bitcoin, right? If I knew all the things I learned and I gave myself the permission to learn because I knew that there would be a solution. If I just knew with a problem and not the solution, I would be such a mess. And there's a lot of people out there who are like that. So hopefully, you can maybe hand this podcast to people out there who are hesitant on Bitcoin, that it might take over or not, is that like I was there once too. I once thought Bitcoin was just an incredibly inefficient database. I didn't get the monetary aspect of it at all, and it's easy to miss, especially like a lot of people don't understand how money works, where it comes from, and like just what it is, and the there's just, once you put the thought into it, once you do the research, the 1,000 hours of research, right, you start to realize, like everything starts to come together. And, Bitcoiners, like, we come from all different angles, we come from all different backgrounds, and we all start just coming to arriving to the same conclusion, that we need to switch to Bitcoin. And, like, fiat coin bad, orange coin good, right? It's as simple. It's that simple. If you believe that, you're a Bitcoiner, right? And so, yeah, there's that's where I think Bitcoin is headed. I think it's going to incentivize us to stop polluting the planet, and put the pollution on the moon, right? And we'll just colonize the moon, and it'll be a great thing. Elon Musk is really concerned about Mars, but who's really concerned about the moon? Jeff Bezos. He's building a reusable rocket also, and he wants to build the lunar economy. He wants to build the infrastructure needed to develop the moon. And like he's another low time preference person who's thinking pretty far ahead, and he's always really thought far ahead. He was arguably one of the guys who invented the cloud computers that we run our everything on today. And so I was just working with AWS today, actually, and so it's just funny how everything comes full circle.
Yeah, and quantum computing, I think, is going to be a hot topic in the next few years in the tech circles. And of course, you're ahead of your time, Hunter. If quantum resistant solutions like P2QRH are implemented, do you think that Bitcoin's lifespan could extend far beyond what most people imagine today?
Yeah, I mean, like we see the final block reward being, programmed intrinsically into the protocol to the year 2140, I mean. And so that should give people an indication of where Satoshi was thinking. Where, it's pretty clear that Satoshi knew what he was doing. And it might have also been clear that, I mean, just, like how I'm looking at how Bitcoin could be upgraded, and how, it was initially vulnerable. Maybe he was like what's interesting is that early Bitcoin miners, like even Bitcoin 0.1, Bitcoin Core 0.1, had the capability to use hashed public keys with one addresses, but that wasn't enabled by default. And most people just mined to the public key addresses by default. And in doing so, Satoshi made this 2 million Bitcoin shield that can potentially be used to, help us during the quantum transition, to provide that crypto economic incentive to not take ordinary people's coins. And so it's just funny. It's funny how like everything just kind of lines up in all the decisions that Satoshi made, and even like just picking just one elliptic curve and the 256-bit elliptic curve. There were other curves that he considered including, but we defaulted to 256-bit, the most secure amount of security that SecP can provide. That was considered more expensive at the time and less scalable, but it is more secure against this current threat. If we're all using, or some of us were using SecP 128K1, we'd be in a much bigger pickle much sooner. And so that is kind of some foresight there too. And that's one reason why in P2QRH we have the default level of security being essentially the 256-bit equivalent, what they call NIST 5 level of security. Although, the transactions could be cheaper if we used 128-bit security, I just don't think that's a responsible default to build in. There might be other people who might, think, no, this is actually a perfectly acceptable compromise, and we don't need to, have a separate attestation discount if we use smaller transactions that are less secure. That's not the kind of Satoshi, that's a kind of decision I think Satoshi would have made. And so I'm just trying to, sort of reflect on the early decisions that Satoshi made and kind of, use those to decide how Bitcoin should go. And although, like we can't just, like Satoshi probably couldn't have foreseen everything, though maybe he could have, you never know. Um, we don't know what Satoshi is or was, we don't know. And that's a topic of discussion for sure. But and a lot of people don't like discussing that because like it could put ordinary people in danger. But I don't think Satoshi was an ordinary person. Like he displayed an extraordinary level of selflessness and not spending and using his coins for his own personal gain. And in some ways that makes me think Satoshi wasn't one of us. Like how like it makes sense from like the anonymity standpoint. It's much easier to be anonymous if you're not of this world, right? And if you're some otherworldly being, a higher power, and you could consider them. And as a result, like it makes you think, this like Bitcoin was given to us as by an outside force that cared so much about humanity that they would try to give us just this one thing that if we figured it out and implemented it and adopted it due to its intrinsic merit, we could potentially save ourselves and establish a civilization that will endure the test of time millions of years into the future.
Hunter, this has been a fantastic discussion. I want to end by asking you, what's your biggest hope for Bitcoin over the next decade, and what's one thing you want to see happen?
Well, I definitely wanted to see it become quantum resistant. Ideally, we build cryptography that's even more secure against quantum computers, and that it's secured by quantum principles. Ideally, we see the number go up, and I don't want to give like a price figure 10 years out. That's two halvings away, right? That's the seventh epoch, and so do with that information what you will. Uh, but yeah, I mean, like this next decade is going to go by so fast. I mean, like there's so many cool, innovative things that are coming out there that you know are like, I mean, I'm just looking forward to seeing. Like we just saw Elon's rocket, reusable rocket, get plucked out of the midair and like land with no landing legs, and that was just like that's just like the tip of the iceberg of where we're going. That's just where we're at now, right? So where are we going to be, 5 years from now when Tesla starts with those like robots, and like like you can just go out and buy a robot for yourself, and you won't need to buy a car because there's all these robo taxis out there, and there's like it's just like this bright, shiny Star Trek future that we're really close to having, so long as there's not like a big major collapse in the fiat system that ends everything, that completely ends all the progress. Because if there's two things that really end, like just get I wouldn't say not just end, but like just make a economy become stagnant, to essentially be frozen in time. It's hyperinflation and socialism, and both of those things kind of like come together because socialists don't quite understand how the economy works. And to be honest, I was once a socialist. I wasn't, I wasn't blessed with libertarian principles growing up. My family is quite liberal and very accepting, but the problem is they don't understand how money works. And once you understand how money works, how markets work, what price signals are, and how important those are, then you start to realize actually capitalism is the best way to do this. Like socialism might. Like, they say, like, if you're young and you're not a socialist, then, you have no heart. But if you're older and you read a few more books, right? If you're not somebody who's more conservative on the political spectrum, then you have no brain. And it was kind of like, although that's like kind of like a pithy anecdote, I think there's some truth to it, as there often is in pithy anecdotes. And I think I consider myself a fiscal conservative just because I'm not an accelerationist. I don't want to accelerate the inevitable. It's coming up fast enough as it is. We need to give people more time. We need to build better lifeboats. We need to, like, Bitcoin is the lifeboat, right? And we need to build the biggest, arc of a lifeboat, right? So that we can get everybody in it and we can save the whole situation. And, the best way we can imagine this happening is just everybody through the voluntary exchange of goods and services and the voluntary adoption of Bitcoin, right? The completely voluntary adoption of a better solution based on its merit alone will be how we, unleash this bright and shiny Star Trek future where we're building all our shit on the moon.
Well, Hunter, it's been a pleasure having you on the Bitcoin Source. Your work on quantum resistant solutions and your insights into the future of Bitcoin have been incredibly valuable. For our listeners, don't forget to follow Hunter on Twitter at CryptoQuick. Thanks again, Hunter, for being on the Bitcoin Source, a Bitcoin conversation. Much appreciated.
Yeah, it was my pleasure. You asked really great questions. I'm looking forward to
Thank you.
watching this again too.
Yes.